You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.
And welcome to the Win-Win podcast. This is Ben Wolf, your host, as always. I want to get into introducing our guest today, who is going to be speaking on the topic of stopping checklist marketing. And before I do that, I want to ask everybody who's listening to or watching this to pause for a minute, stop, leave a review, like, comment, follow, engage with it, get this content out there to more people or wherever it is that you are watching or listening to this. That will make the content, the knowledge that we're sharing from our guest today and with other episodes available to more people. So I ask you to stop and do that. And after covering that topic, I want to get into introducing our guest today, who is the Director of Content Strategy at GrowGetter, which is a digital performance marketing firm. He is the head of content marketing at multiple companies. He's the host of the Business Storytelling Show on DBTV. His name is Christoph Trappe, and you can learn more about him at Christoph, Trappe.com. Welcome, Christoph.
Hey, Ben. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I appreciate you making the time, coming on and sharing what we're talking about today. And if I could ask you, first of all, like I do with all my guests, to please give us a quick 2-minute background, history, and context to understand sort of where you came from and how we came to be talking about what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, I grew up in journalism, went to school to be a sports writer, believe it or not. Didn't really work ever a day in my life as a full-time sports writer. Went right into investigative reporting, police reporting, public safety reporting, and then learned how to tell stories, how to connect with audiences, how to interview people, how to get good stuff out of them. And then at some point made the move into marketing, and then content marketing came to the forefront with Joe Polizzi and the Content Marketing Institute. So certainly, in my opinion, content marketing is very similar to journalism, right? I mean, you just basically tell stories, share stories that people care about. And the only difference is it's not for the public good, so to speak, for lack of a better term, but it is for your target consumer, your target buyer, right? So it's a little bit of a different take on that. But at the end of the day, we have to tell stories. We have to share content that our audience cares about. And it has to be at a certain quality. It has to be a certain level of, let's call it sophistication without overthinking it here. And so basically that's what I focused on in my career. How do you do that? How do you create content for the machines and for the humans so people can find you and, try to do that on all these different channels. There's a new channel. You betcha I'll be on there. I'll try it. When Threads came out, I think I was user 164,000, something like that. So pretty early on. Not sure where Threads is going to go. But my point is, try new things, try different things, see what works. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to what I've been doing in my career is, tell those unique stories about your brand, about your company to stay relevant to people.
Well, a lot of people, when they think of content marketing, when they think of storytelling, they don't necessarily think that they're inexorably linked, right? Which, that's the way you described it. So, they'll look at, they'll do content marketing about just teaching or principles or information or advice, but there's no stories. There's no storytelling involved about anybody. Yeah. So what place does storytelling have, I guess, in marketing or in content marketing specifically?
What's interesting, you say it like that, is I agree. A lot of people see it like that, and but you have to engage people, and you don't just engage people by, throwing out information, right? I mean, you have to make it engaging. I mean, I think about some of these sales VPs, and I am not in sales. I do not want to be in sales, but when they come into meetings, they tell a story, right? They make it engaging. They don't just come in there and say, here's the latest number. I mean, some people do, right? But that's not as much fun to listen to as somebody who comes in there and actually has some engaged personality and shares something. So at the end of the day, content marketing will stand out if you make it engaging, maybe entertaining, maybe, sometimes you see this in writing, like the play on words, right? It gets people's attention a little bit more, especially in today's world, Ben, where people skim, right? I mean, people skim everything. So you have the people who only read the headlines. So you're writing an article through headlines, then the people that kind of dive a little deeper, and then the people who literally read every word, or read it pretty quickly. So, but at the end of the day, to stand out, you have to tell a story. And that comes down to, like, sometimes you may quote people, right? Andy Christodina talked about this for many years. And he always says something like, well, journalists would never write an article without quoting somebody. Why do content marketers write articles without any quotes? And I agree, right? Like, ask people for their opinion, and then you can share it, you can tag them, they can be connected to the piece, they'll share it for you, but you have to be more engaging than just saying, here's the 10 ways to do a podcast, blah, blah, blah. And then you say the same thing everybody else has said already, right? So you have to make it more engaging, more fun, add some personality at the end of the day.
So do you put those kind of things like quoting other people and wordplay that you mentioned and other things that make things more funny or engaging, do you put that in the category of storytelling, or is that just separate and also important?
Well, some people might argue that's copywriting, right? But you don't actually get those word plays until you tell a story, right? That's like, it's all part of the story. I'll give you an example. The other day I quoted somebody and they said something about, well, this, whatever the thing was, that's like a cook who is never tasting their own food, right? And so that was the quote. And then the next sentence, I said, well, let's get cooking, right? And let's talk about these things. And I couldn't do that wordplay without that quote, right? Unless I thought about actually making that connection or that comparison. But my point is, like, it has to kind of build on each other. It has to lead people through the content. It has to be, it has to be fun. It has to be engaging. It can't just be, and don't get me wrong, I know we haven't talked about AI for the first 3 minutes here, right? But AI is like eating up the headlines. And I use AI all the time. I mean, all the time for all kinds of different things, headlines, outlines, ideas, those kind of things. And I tried to write a couple articles with AI. It's total garbage, even when you try to have it right in your own voice, but it doesn't have that personality. It doesn't have that personal experience. And, some people will say, well, you can train it on your voice. I'm like, okay, but can I train it on my experience, right? So if I'm the founder of a company and you're my subject matter expert, I'm trying to get that uniqueness out of you, right? When I'm talking to you, I'm trying to share that unique story and then try to present it in a way that's engaging. And that's where the wordplay comes in. That's where some of those techniques come in.
It's interesting that you mentioned, sharing people's unique stories. One of the things you talk about on your website is you talk about it's important to share unique stories efficiently to reach prospects and retain existing customers. What do you mean about sharing unique stories efficiently? That was like an very interesting choice of word I found. What does that mean?
So I'm not sure everybody has ever asked me like that about that, but that's a great question. Many companies have these processes. They take forever, right? So you're trying to do one little thing, one article or something, and it has to go through 29 people to get approved. And by the time, it gets out the door, like maybe the opportunity is already gone, for example. So my point is, you have to figure out how to do things efficiently. I'm a big fan of having collaboration. I think everything needs to be approved by somebody. Some companies, I get it, legal may have to be involved depending what it is. But if you're writing an article on the 10 ways to do whatever, right, or whatever, and like you add your own story, what's the legal implication? Like for most businesses, like why is that going to take a 4-week approval process? So you need to figure out how do you do it as efficiently and quickly as possible. Because stuff changes. And I still see that a lot. I call that approval hell. People get hung up in things, taking forever to get approved. And you have to find a way to do that quickly. And the other thing is, there is such a thing, Ben, as content velocity, right? So like, and some people will argue, well, you don't just want to do content, like quantity over quality. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is you have to have the right type of quantity to get to the right level of quality. And I'll give you an example. James Clear, is that his name? Atomic Habits. Don't remember. I think that's his name.
I think that sounds right. Yeah.
He's talking about like the example he gave was, you give one group and say, we want you to take one perfect picture. And then the other group, you say, we want you to take 100 pictures. And guess who actually ended up with the perfect picture? The group that took 100, because they just played around more, they tried different things. But the group that was trying to do one perfect picture didn't work, because it's way too much pressure, right? Nothing is ever perfect when you try to be perfect. So you just have to kind of get out there and get going and try things with the highest quality possible.
It's funny that reminds me of a little statement by Stephen King in his book on writing, where he talks about how you just have to show up every day, even if what you're writing is garbage. He writes his 2,000 words a day, and he says that, my muse, like, I think he calls him some like fat guy with a cigar, like, wears, would just like not show up, a lot of days. But like, because he's there writing every day, like the muse, he knows where to find him when he's ready to give him a good idea. And so, he just feels like if he weren't doing that discipline of creating that content, then the muse is not going to know where to find him. And it's just, he's never going to show up. Just, I don't know, the story that you told just reminded me of that little observation.
It's very true. And, people, I mean, especially today where everything changes so quickly and new content types come out and whatever, you really have to do something every day. And I don't know, I mean, I was going to say, well, do I write 2,000 words a day? I probably
that's
do.
just his personal, but
I probably do with
wow.
all like emails and like client work and like my own blogs. Probably, maybe not quite, but depends on the day. But at the end of the day, I mean, you have to keep doing it, and it has to become muscle memory. It's like, I know we're not talking about podcasting, but like podcasting, like you invite me on a show, like, hey, I'm just having a conversation with you, right? I'm not overthinking it. We're showing up, we're talking about it. And I think that's like the same thing. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And my favorite story might still be Jeff Boulis, jeffboulis.com, one of the great content marketing sites out there. His first blog post was about Jennifer Aniston. It was so lame. And he still shows that to people. He said, I just got started, but look how stupid this is. Has nothing to do with anything. And so like, even Jeff Boulis, who has a gazillion people reading his blog and affiliate marketing, income and whatever, started writing about Jennifer Aniston doing one thing or another. And, it was not that good.
Right. Just to be in movement. What's the key things? Obviously, this is a huge topic, and it's the main thing you speak about. It's the main topic of your podcast. But what is storytelling? I guess what are the main things or elements that people need to be aware of, whether they're a business owner or someone working in marketing, they need to be aware of when they're incorporating storytelling in their marketing or their content marketing?
I mean, first of all, I'm still a believer in it has to be accurate and authentic, and you can't just make up crap, right? I mean, it has to be something that actually exists, and there's a problem, but you have to actually address a problem that your audience has. And so this is kind of an interesting beast, because sometimes companies don't agree on who they're trying to reach. So you really have to figure out who is your ideal customer profile, who are you trying to reach, what are their actual problems. And then, every time you tell a story, you really address those problems. Now, what's interesting in content marketing is that, so like in a traditional, let's call it a traditional advertising campaign, for example, maybe even years ago, maybe even today to an extent still, you do it like one time, right? Like there's one thing, you address it, and then you just stay out there. On content marketing, it's like an ongoing thing, right? It's not just one time. So you might address that same issue like 8 different ways, right? Because people search for different topics related to that topic, but then you have to address, here's the problem. Like, I don't want to say you want to get people riled up, but you kind of want to really hit oh yeah, this is the issue, blah, blah, blah. This is how annoying it is. And then you want to solve it to an extent, right? In your content, and you want to figure out what it is that you're actually selling. I think this sounds relatively easy in theory, but again, if you don't know who your audience is, if it's not documented, I would really recommend to document that. Of course, today you can actually use Google Bard or There's actually now AI companies out there that create personas for you just by putting in a few things, and then just create like a persona card, and you're trying to reach and what they're after. I'm also a big fan now, like, in Google Bard or ChatGPT, you can go in there and you can say something like, this is my persona, this is who I'm trying to reach. Would they find this content interesting? And they can give you feedback on that. So I'm a big fan of that. But at the end of the day, you do want to address some kind of problem. You do want to offer some kind of solution. How deep you go into that solution it depends on what you're selling, right? So if you're selling like a software product that actually can help you fix that problem, you might go pretty deep in the answer, right? Because you're not selling more consulting services, for example, you're selling a product. If you're selling consulting services, maybe you don't go quite as deep. But there is, again, Andy Christina mentioned this, there is a train of thought where the more you give to your audience, the more they will give to you long term, right? So holding back too much stuff long term will actually not benefit you. Giving away knowledge actually benefits companies to bring in more business. I mean, even when you look at Andy, his company Orbit Media Studios, they do websites, right? But he talks about all kinds of different things that are related to websites, and he just gives it freely away. And then guess what? When these people need new websites, Andy's top of mind, right? That's kind of how content marketing works.
Right. So yeah, I mean, main things I'm taking away from what you said so far are the importance of how critical it is to always be bringing back and coming back to who your customer is, what their main problem is, and then poking that problem at the beginning and then helping solve it. And where does I mean, correct me if maybe I just don't understand what the word storytelling means, at least in your world. But it seems like that is still separate from storytelling. I mean, that's a lot of the content maybe of your articles or whatever you're publishing or your videos, but or your podcasts, etc. But how does storytelling fit into that, or is that what storytelling is, and I'm missing something?
Yeah, I mean, that is a part of what storytelling is, in my opinion. I mean, how do you approach your audience? How do you share stories that are important to them? And then you have to share them in an engaging way, and that's, I think, what's evolving over and over and over. Because, I mean, think about how content marketing, when it first started, right? A lot of companies, they would just go, oh, here, write an article on whatever, blah, 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 this topic. And then the writer, is supposed to write it without anything else, right? Like, how are they going to do it? They're going to Google what's already on the web? That doesn't help. So to really level up that storytelling, what you have to do is you have to figure out what is our own unique personal experience or point of view on that topic. And then you have to kind of incorporate that into your content. And this is why I think when you look at some of the companies, there were some companies out there that fired their writers because now they're just using ChatGPT. It makes no sense, right? That's not storytelling. ChatGPT right now is not telling a story. It's just kind of, puking out facts. And sometimes those facts are not even correct. If I don't know if you follow the NFL. I asked ChatGPT, who should I, or maybe it was Bard, I don't know. I use Google Bard mostly, honestly, but I said, who should I draft number one in my NFL fantasy draft? And they said, Christian McCaffrey of the Carolina Panthers. And Christian McCaffrey doesn't even play for the Carolina Panthers. He plays for the 49ers. So, like, he used to play for them, but it's like, it's not correct. So how accurate can that be? So my point is, I think the part where storytelling comes in is you have to bring in your own unique perspective or unique experience. And I think you see a lot of people who don't do this very well, or they're trying, but they're not quite over the hump yet. And they say things on LinkedIn like, this weekend, when I was walking down the road, I saw 3 cars, blah, blah, blah. And those 3 cars reminded me that content travels in threes. Do you know what I mean? Like some totally stupid, unrelated thing. And like, but what they're trying to do, like, to spin that a little bit more positive, they are early in their understanding of how to implement business storytelling and how to get their own personal experience in there. And sometimes it's harder than it sounds, because if, I'm sitting in this office in Iowa and I don't see that many people other than on meetings. So like my personal experience, I have to get it from somewhere. And if I don't get it, then I talk about the 3 cars driving down the road, and, content comes in threes or whatever. So you have to kind of figure out what's your story and then implement it and include it in all the different things that you do.
If you're talking now to the 3-car guy, what would you tell him is a better way to do that?
Well, so people always ask me, where do I get my ideas for articles? And they come from everywhere, but it's hardly ever one exact example, right? So for example, let's just pick on the 3-car example. So content does come actually in threes, right? Like when you say, like, I'm doing these 1, 2, 3, like that's like, it's literally a writing thing. So instead of you can tell that same story without ever talking about those stupid cars, right? Like, so what I would do is I would think about, okay, is that actually a problem? Like, do people in marketing not understand this concept?
Right.
And then I might pay attention to that.
Right.
Like when I'm
Is
seeing
that more fundamental, right? Is going back to that first question you mentioned. Look at your customer and what their problems are.
Correct.
And am I writing about something on that lines? And I just should not be writing this article at all. This goes to I think what I wanted to ask you about, which was marketing that's happening to marketing that's performing, but we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah. So, but what happens is so I actually do think, we didn't talk about this example. I didn't even think about it until 5 seconds ago, but I do think that some people don't get that concept. I see copy all the time where people have 4 things or 5 things or 6 things, which is way too many, right? So maybe at some point I should do an article or a podcast or whatever on why everything needs to come in threes. So the grammar girl, right? She could come on, she could talk about that, I'm sure. Or somebody like that. And, we can kind of make that an interesting story. But I will never, ever, to save my life, mention those 3 cars. That's where the idea came from. Makes no difference. So you have to kind of separate ideation from the production. So ideas can come from everywhere, but you don't always have to tell people where they came from. You can just kind of the one problem is sometimes, depending on what you do. So let's say, and this is not the case at all, but let's say I have clients. Let's say I got 10 clients who don't get that concept at all, and they all get it wrong. And I've already mentioned it in meetings 100 times. And now I'm writing about it, so they all will think that's about them. But it's not. It's actually about those 3 stupid cars. Do you see what I'm saying? So you have to kind of weigh the timing when you publish things, and how you phrase it too. So just something to think about. But ideas can come from everywhere, including 3 cars driving by.
Right. Well, speaking of where ideas come from, to quote Stephen King again, he says in his introduction to one of Gary Larson's Far Side anthologies that, just like everyone asks here, Gary Larson, where he gets his ideas for his Far Side cartoons, and people always ask Stephen King, where do you get your ideas from? And obviously, like you said, they just come from everywhere and anywhere, and who knows where. Yep. And so he would just answer, I get it. He gets them from Utica. That's where he gets his ideas from. They come from Utica. But one of the things you also talk about is transforming your marketing and your communications from happening to performing. What do you mean by that?
It's very easy for people who are creating stuff to just create, right? And somebody needs to do it. Like create the article, create a white paper, create a pop-up, create whatever, right? Create social posts. But then we need to look at what's actually working and what's not working. And we also need to understand the timeline. So for example, on podcasts, I know it's a very common thing to look at the 30 days after an episode is published, right? That's a very common metric. And somebody has to evaluate whether or not whatever it is we're doing is working. But we also have to evaluate what is the right timeline, right? So if I'm running an ad campaign, I was just quoted an article on advertising versus content marketing. That's how they're phrased it. And advertising, in my opinion, is very, I don't want to say short term, but it's like, when you stop paying money to the ad platform, the ad stops, right? But if you do content marketing well, it compounds over time, right? And it gives for a long time, especially once you've built up a library of content and those kind of things. So, but somebody has to analyze those things. So if we just churn out content, churn out stuff, and we don't actually look at what's working, what's not working, and that is so important. And that's on the back end. On the front end, people, I think, also can be more strategic about what has a chance to work. So I'll give you an example when it comes to even SEO. So like the 3-car example again, right? Is anybody even searching for that topic of that writing concept? Maybe they are, maybe they're not, right? But you can look at what are the phrases they use. You can kind of update your strategy, the content you're going to produce, and be more strategic. So at the end of the day, you want to look at what's working, what's not working, and then move forward quickly. The other thing, especially on social media today, there's so many opportunities when new content assets, content types come out to try them and see what works and what doesn't work. Really try them. I'll give you an example. And this is an entertainment podcast, right? But Bobby, whatever her name is, I want to say Althoff. I don't know if that's her last name, but she launched this podcast, right? And went viral everywhere on TikTok. You've probably seen her yourself, right? Interviewing like Mark Cuban and other people. And it's just like, and now there's a fallout with Drake and whatever. But what she did is like, this was not even a thing when, I started my podcast to go on TikTok and like hack up your podcast. And now with 10-minute videos, you can upload 10 minutes of your whole podcast, right? But that's how she built her brand.
TikTok has 10-minute videos now?
Yeah. And I thought it was
10
2.
minutes. I didn't realize. Yeah.
10 minutes. So you have to do it on your computer. And what I do, I take my podcast episodes. And so I just take the beginning and then I go 10 minutes down and then I find like the last section break, right? Because there's sections basically after questions. And then I cut it there and I just upload it. It has a few hundred listens, right? So it's, I think it's definitely worth it. But my point is, she's hitting all these new channels to find an audience. And I think anybody can do that. I don't care if you're B2B, B2C, direct to consumer, whatever, just figure out what are the different things you can try and then repurpose your content over and over and over on all the different channels.
All right. Well, look, Christoph, I really appreciate this. Again, people can learn about you and what you do for people. Christoph Trappe, TRAPPE.com. They can listen to your podcast at the Business Storytelling Show as well. I'm just absorbing what you're saying about, in terms of like when you're creating content, like it just has to be checked against your target market client and what their problems are every single time, and not just created for the sake of being created. And like that 3-car example, like ask yourself, is that something people are struggling with? And if so, tackle it from that angle. And just that not everybody incorporates that philosophy, obviously, though we should. So truly appreciate that. Engaging storytelling, not just facts and teachings and listicles and things like that. So truly appreciate you sharing this and coming on and making the time today.
You bet. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Awesome. And everybody else, we'll see you on the other side. Thank you.
You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.